Hello, everyone, and welcome to your podcast, The Talent Pieces. I'm your host, Carlos, and today we have Jeff Jhonson with us. Jeff, very happy to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Carlos.
Awesome. So, Jeff, I know a little bit more about your career. We have spoken, and great relation that we have had. Great advice that I have received from you. I'm very thankful to have you here, but also very thankful for everything that you have done in my entrepreneur journey. But I'll let the audience listen a little bit more about what you're up to as COO at Dr. Knows Best and just your career overall.
Yes, Dr. Knows Best is interesting in multiple facets because I really believe in the products we're developing. We're developing products for the nursery, for young children, 0 to 5 years old, newborns, and it's a fantastic company, but also a fantastic mission, because we're giving relief to parents who need it and trying to keep them out of an emergency room, and the high cost of that for something that we can so easily deal with at home through our line of products.
Wow. So from working your corporate job on a Fortune 500 companies, having a background in the startup world, being a fractional COO, CTO, and CFO for multiple companies, how did you ended up at Dr. Knows Best? So any kind of recap on your career.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I can say is that I've had a fairly diverse career. So I spent about 10 years in startups right out of college. Spent another 15. We all sought cover after the dot-com crash and went to Fortune 500. And then in 2018, I got the itch to get back into startups. And part of the reason for that is that in a startup world, you can move much quicker with your products. You can develop things faster. You can be more nimble. With Fortune 500, you have plenty of funds to do things, but you can't move as fast. It takes a lot of approvals, and it takes a little bit more direction and strategic planning to make big moves. And so there's kind of a trade-off. And I got to the point in my career where I was able to make choices to get back into the startup world, which really gets me motivated, makes me wake up in the morning, because we really can change the world through the products we're developing, whether it's my company or others, or your company.
Okay. Right. So tell us a little bit more about how it has been, that journey, because sometimes we have heard this multiple times where people think culture only matters for startups or if you're Google, and how that influences the fact of how you get talent if you're Google or if you're a startup. But it's really something that is applicable in every enterprise, in every level of organization, mid-sized business, startups, Fortune 500s. So tell us a little bit more about that. And I remember a conversation or a workshop you gave about the Netflix approach to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a document that I don't know if Netflix meant for it to get onto the internet, but it got out there probably around 2012, 2011. It's called Netflix Culture and Responsibility. It's a fantastic document. I'm sure they've gone through multiple iterations of it now, but if you do a search for this document, it's fantastic. Maybe you can link to it in the bottom of your description for the podcast. But what I can say is that one of the incredible things about this is that it talks about how Netflix was able to go from 50 employees to 5,000 without fundamentally changing their culture. And normally, what happens to a company as you grow from 50 employees to 5,000 is more and more process tends to creep in, and process tends to slow you down.
Right.
So think back to the reason I got back into startups is because we're a little bit more nimble. We're more nimble than a Fortune 500, and part of that's because of our ability to not go through massive levels of approvals and able to move quicker on different ideas and concepts and try them out and test them. Fortune 500 doesn't have that because they like to put controls in place. You get controls in place because you don't always get to hire the best people in every role in a Fortune 500 company. When you're smaller, you can really laser focus on hiring what we like to call A players or B players. And by doing that, you're going to make your company stronger. Now, as you grow, and you grow rapidly, and you go from, like Netflix did, from 50 to 5,000 employees, the problem that you face is that you tend to have to make decisions where you bring in maybe somebody who's not the best fit. And by the best fit, I'm not talking about somebody who's, a Berkeley PhD or a Stanford PhD. I'm talking about bringing in the person who's right for the role. You wouldn't bring in a developer who writes code every day in Java and so forth. You wouldn't want to bring them in to be your graphics design person. They would be an A player as a Java developer, but they would be a D player as a graphics designer.
Right.
So you want to make sure you're matching up the right people with the right roles within your company. And if you do that, if you get the A players in the right roles, then you're going to succeed much more wildly than you could have ever anticipated, because you're going to be functioning at what I would call peak efficiency. And if you go through this Netflix document really talks about how they laid out what are the traits that define what a strong Netflix employee is. And then beyond that, it goes to making sure that you hire somebody that meets those particular traits.
Right.
And don't make exceptions to those rules. And if you don't make exceptions, then you're going to end up with 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 employees in Netflix case, where you have strong players at every position. And then they go along the different rules about when do you give raises and when do you promote. And they talk about all their general rules. Expense reporting, they even go into expense reporting in this. And they say they don't have long, drawn-out expense plans and budgets, and they don't have a team offshore reviewing every receipt that you submit. They actually have a simple rule: spend the money internally at Netflix as you would spend it yourself. And this, when you take a look at this document, and we talked about this at Your Company Puzzle, we talked about how it related to your business, because
Right.
it's not perfectly absolutely relatable to every business, but you can take a lot of lessons learned from what they accomplished. And the reason I think Netflix is a great example is because I've come from startups, and you're lucky if you disrupt one business in your lifetime. Netflix has disrupted 3. And so they've interrupted the Hollywood movie system. They've done streaming. They also disrupted the business of movie rental with Blockbuster. Right. So they've done a lot of different businesses, and you don't do that over 20 or 25 years without having been doing something right.
I think it's very important as startup founders think about hiring those first team members. Sometimes we think, okay, I need to make my hiring process very efficient. When I grow up, like whenever my company is at this stage, I need to start focusing on bringing better people or more qualified people to the role, or that are a better cultural fit to the role. But this is a day one conversation. This is as fundamental on how your business will scale as your business model, as your go-to-market strategy is. What are those A players that will bring that value to my business? So where those culture come in here, because we might find very efficient people in multiple roles, but that they might not necessarily be a culture fit for your business.
Right. But I would even argue back to your example of that you hire what you need now, and then later on when you grow up, so to speak, then you're going to hire the right players. I would argue it's the opposite.
Right.
When you have very few players on your team, if you're less than 10 employees, every person is so absolutely critical and has to pull their own weight. They have to be A players in the right roles. You can't wait until you get bigger, because you might not get there if you don't have the right players in the role to begin with. And making sure that you don't necessarily need multi-tool players, people who can do many different things. You need to understand what the requirements are for the role, and that you're picking the best possible person to do that.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. Now, how does that apply from the ADPs of the world to the startups? And maybe if you can share some of the experiences that you have had while being, strategic advisor to multiple companies, or even being a mentor in Emory. Just anything that you've been able to share, or that you have been able to see on how this has impacted their companies.
So you touched on a few areas there. Yeah, I did spend quite a few years at ADP, and I don't say necessarily the Fortune 500 is bad, because it taught me a lot of fantastic things about how to run a business, for instance. And I bring that to the advice that I give others about how to build out P&Ls, balance sheets, how to watch your cash flow, and things like that. That all came from Fortune 500. But as I got out of Fortune 500, I initially thought that where my advice would be best suited would be the decision-making process around decisions around your business. What strategically should I do in order to move my business in the right direction? Whereas actually what I found is more financial related, and financial advice, and how to help companies share that ADP experience, so to speak, and how to run a business. And ADP knows how to run a business if there's one thing that they know how to do. And that's the one thing I took from them. But when I got back into the startups, I should say, after I left ADP, I was able to use that advice to give companies the best advice about how to maintain their cash flow and manage how they're spending their dollars. As I got into Quantum, which is my company that I use to consult with different companies, I found that, while it is financially focused, it's a lot of different areas. It's around operations, hiring. We talked about the Netflix presentation around culture, which I'm a huge proponent of culture because I think it leads to ultimate success in your business. But what I do is, and somebody actually at Atlanta Tech Village coined it as a startup therapist.
I was about to mention that one.
Yeah. And I love it. I love being the startup therapist. I can tell you stories. Let's just say that from my days before I joined ADP, I've seen a lot of different things, a lot of different ways a business can go bad, and I like to share those. And if I see a hint of that in a business, I'll share my advice, my anecdotes if I can. And you even mentioned the Emory Accelerator. Quantum helps lead the Emory Accelerator for startups over there, and it's a fantastic course if folks apply for it and get selected into it, where I share that advice, some of these anecdotes and some stories, and talk about financials. Others come in and talk about how to build out your cap table. They talk about how to develop your product into a startup-based product that can be relatable to investors. So there's a lot to be offered through the accelerator, and I find it just gives me an opportunity to share kind of the things I've learned, because I don't want to have all this. I don't want to have gone through this pain and not be able to share it with somebody. I think that's the value that I can give back.
Okay, awesome. And I think as it comes to identifying your approach, which starts on the financial side, because when you and I started collaborating together, it was, how do we build solid financials that will help the business scale? But as we continue to look into the financials, it's like, hey, for you to get from this headcount to this other headcount, it's not just how you take care of the numbers, but how you take care of the culture, how you take care of your processes as you continue to scale, so they can not, and by this I'm not saying add more processes, is just make more efficient what you already have, so you can scale in a more steady way, because this financial model will take you there. This is a matter of these other components around culture, technology, proper human resources and talent acquisition that will help scale in a very successful way. Now, the other thing that we focus a lot on this podcast is about international talent and how the benefit of talent in Latin America could be used on multiple sides. Again, there's a perception sometimes that, okay, that's just for startups, or that's just for Fortune 500 companies in terms of having access to this talent. But we were talking with Ali the other day that if you have the right culture, if you have the right structure in place, then you can scale beyond your employees, but find more contractors or find third-party employees that will help your business scale. Any experience that you have had, again, from Fortune 500 experience, but for startups as well?
Yeah. So when I was in the startup world initially out of college, we didn't use any offshoring we had all on-staff development resources. When I went to ADP, though, we did start to build out a resource pool in India to help us with a lot of the database development, a lot of the front-end Java development that we had. We used the more staff augmentation, it allowed us to be a 24/7 operation. So we would have some onshore developers. They would write code where they would put in a request to create something in the database in terms of store procedures and such. And then there would be an offshore team who came in after hours in India who would work on that. They would leave the work off, and then we pick it up during the U.S. hours. So it was a kind of a 24/7 operation, more of a staff augmentation. What I can say, though, is that, and you asked about this just a minute ago, and that is, when I come into a company, I definitely want to look at and understand the financials. And I'm going to tie this back to offshore in just a second here, but what I mean is that to understand the financials and what your goals are for the year in terms of top line revenue, I want to understand how you felt you were going to get there. And so I start with looking at the bottom-up plan. If I think of your company, Puzzle, who I've worked with, you're looking to book hours, bill hours, and have developers. You have clients who need developers who book those hours. Okay, so how many clients do you need? How many development placements do you have to have? So what was your plan there? Okay, then as you work from the bottom up, you feel like, is this a realistic plan? Does the math actually work from a bottom up perspective? Because if you just go from the top down and just say, hey, we want to hit 10 million in revenue on the top line, and then we back into that, that's another way to do it. But I would rather understand how, from a bottom-up perspective, you plan to hit that and what's realistic based upon your existing run rate. So two different ways of logic that can meet each other. Now, a lot of times you can only meet those top-line goals through offshore development. But
Right.
one of the other things is it gives you more flexibility to have offshore developers, because these are, if you're the company buying from Puzzle and buying developers from Puzzle, then you're looking at it as a situation where you can staff up and staff down at a moment's notice without having to go through some elaborate hiring process. Because you have someone like Puzzle who's already sourcing candidates for roles that are as yet undefined, and always have somebody ready, or maybe you even have someone on the bench that you can put into a role immediately. That's the flexibility, and a company who's building some web-based application is not going to have.
Right.
Yeah.
I think in tying everything from looking at the financials, but also looking at how every single individual that you bring into your business, regardless on if it's a third-party contractor, employee, or is your full-time employee, I think it's very important to note that the fact that they are offshore, nearshore, the fact that they are working or they are contractors of another company doesn't necessarily mean that they are not A players.
That's right.
And it comes back to that cultural part where if you find the right partner, or if you find the right strategy yourself, because you not always need to work with partners to find talent, offshore or in any other geolocation, but it's how you can make sure that even when you are using someone else, you find that partner that will get you those A players, and that they can continue to have that impact in your business growth.
Yeah, and there are tools out there, things like Culture Index and some others that are available to figure out if they're a good cultural fit for the role. So there's a lot of AI around this. There are a lot of call them psychological tools that you can use to figure out if folks are the right fit for the company. I mean, just like I said, I'm not looking necessarily for a developer who's a PhD in computer science from Stanford. I'm looking for the person who's the right fit for the role because they're going to excel in the role. And so there's sometimes this disconnect by the amount of paper they have in terms of degrees versus their applicability for the role, but they might be difficult to work with. One of the things that Netflix talks a lot about is that you can have very strong development resources. You can have very strong people internally, but if they are kind of pain in the ass to deal with, maybe that's 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. There's no room for that in our business.
Yeah.
They call them brilliant jerks in their paper. So they're brilliant, but they're really difficult to work with, and a lot of companies deal with those people. Well, what I think the companies really are saying to themselves now is that the pain isn't worth it. We can go find somebody who's brilliant without the jerk part. So I think that that's a really key component to it. And to your point, I mean, anybody who, whether they're a full-time employee, a contractor to the company, you can figure out if they're the right cultural fit by seeing if they meet the 6, 8, 9 different criteria that you feel as a business defines what is a strong person for your business.
Right. And one of the, just going back to the brilliant jerk example is, I'm not a huge fan of AI because I think there is still this consulting approach that is very relevant to the industry. That doesn't mean that AI is not relevant and that is not very useful today. But I think it has to be a perfect combination between all the AI tools that you have access to and the human cultural approach. So, because even my team right now is using a lot of AI to kind of vet candidates, make sure that from the skills perspective, they are solid, but there always needs to be that human interaction that say, hey, this is not a brilliant jerk. This is someone that will be an A player for your organization and that will add a lot of value without the painful part of dealing with them.
Yeah, there's the analytical part of this, which is the way you're applying AI to the analytical aspect of it. But then there is an art to it as well. And so the art is something that AI hasn't gotten to. We don't know if it'll ever get there. But the art of that is being able to listen to your client and understand what makes them tick, for lack of a better term, and understanding that. Eventually, AI might be able to do that, but I guess we'd all be sitting on the beach, and I suspect that isn't going to happen. Well, AI does all the world's work. But what I would say is that there is an art aspect to what you do and what other companies do, and that is the consultative aspect of it. Listening to them and understanding it, being able to apply prior learnings to it. If somebody can program that into a large language model, touche. But I think that we're pretty far from that now.
Yeah. Now, I've also been impressed on how fast AI has evolved in the past year. I think it's kind of been on more of a speedway recently than it was previous years.
For absolute tasks is what I would say. So I use AI and I use things like Claude within my IDE to develop code, for instance, or databases. If I want to write a stored procedure that just I wanted to do this, 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 and this, I can create kind of an input to an AI that will go develop that for me and write me the stored procedure, and I just have to copy and paste it right into my IDE, and I'm done. Or if I'm using Claude within my development IDE, and I say I want to write servlet that does such and such a function working against this data structure. If I write the input of that, that's absolute. Coding is absolute. The flexibility is maybe how you approach your coding.
Yes.
And we haven't quite gotten there yet because AI will pick a particular approach and it might not be the best one, but then that's where you have to input it and guide it and lead it. But coding is absolute. We know how to end a SQL statement. We put a semicolon at the end of it, right? It knows that that's absolute. That's not going to change. And so it's easy to teach AI those particular aspects of coding, but it's that art aspect. It is, why do you want to design your database in a certain way? Why do you want to design your application a certain way? What are all the inputs that would define that? Like I said, maybe we'll get there. Maybe quicker than we think. People come back and look at this later and go, man, they were wrong.
But while we get there, I think it's still very crucial for businesses, regardless of their company size, players and how they can have access to them, whether they are based in the U.S. or they are in any other geolocation. So, Jeff, I thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. To our audience, if you are enjoying this podcast, please hit subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. So, thank you very much, Jeff, and talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.